Imagine a world where the gears of global power shift silently, like a chess master moving pieces in the dead of night, positioning for dominance without a whisper of warning. If you stay with me through this tale, you'll emerge not just informed, but armed with the quiet cunning to navigate the economic storms ahead, turning tariffs into treasures and deals into dynasties. In an era where young minds chase crypto trends and sustainable startups, this free trade pact between the EU and India isn't just news. It's the hidden blueprint for building wealth in a fractured world economy. The stage is set in January 2026, as President Trump's tariffs ripple across the globe like a calculated siege, raising barriers that force nations to redraw their alliances. These tariffs, projected to boost U.S. federal revenues by $175.1 billion in 2026 alone, have sparked higher prices for American consumers and disrupted supply chains worldwide. In response, the European Union and India have forged a landmark free trade agreement, a strategic countermove that unites 1.9 billion people in a market poised to challenge U.S. isolationism. This deal, after nearly 2 decades of negotiations, eliminates or reduces tariffs on 96.6% of EU goods exports to India by value, setting the foundation for a new era of interdependence. At its core, this agreement is a cold calculus of mutual gain, where Europe secures access to India's booming consumer base and India taps into advanced technology and capital. Bilateral trade between the two already reached €120 billion in 2024, with EU imports from India at €71 billion. Now, officials anticipate doubling EU goods exports to India by 2032, generating annual tariff savings of approximately €4 billion. Such figures aren't mere projections, they're the levers of power that will reshape industries, from chemicals to machinery, creating efficiencies that Trump's walls cannot penetrate. Consider the automotive sector, where tariffs on EU cars and parts will plummet, allowing brands like Volkswagen and Mercedes to flood Indian roads with affordable models. This influx could slash costs for Indian consumers by up to 20% in some categories, while boosting EU exports in autos by billions. Yet, in this Game of Thrones, Indian manufacturers gain too, with easier access to European components that enhance quality and innovation. The result? A surge in joint ventures, where control over supply chains shifts from US-dominated routes to Euro-Asian corridors, insulating both sides from American volatility. Textiles and apparel tell a similar story of calculated expansion, as India's labor-intensive industry benefits from reduced EU duties on fabrics and garments. Exports from India to the EU, already a key driver, could grow by 30% in the near term, supporting millions of jobs in regions like Tamil Nadu. Europe's fashion houses, in turn, secure cheaper sourcing, maintaining margins amid rising global costs fueled by Trump's policies. This isn't charity. It's a precise alignment of interests, where vulnerability to external shocks diminishes and economic fortresses strengthen. Pharmaceuticals emerge as a battleground of intellect and influence, with the deal facilitating smoother trade in generics and APIs between the two giants. India, supplying 20% of the world's generics, will see barriers drop on exports to Europe, potentially adding €2 billion annually to its pharma revenue. For the EU, this means diversified supplies away from China, a direct hedge against Trump's tariffs that have hiked costs on Asian imports by 15 to 25%. In the shadows, patents and IP protections tighten, ensuring that innovation remains a tool of control rather than chaos. Agriculture whispers of subtle shifts, where EU spirits and cheeses gain entry into India's middle-class markets, with tariffs slashed on products like whiskey and wine. This could double EU agri-exports to India within 5 years, adding €1.5 billion in value. India reciprocates with easier access for its spices and seafood, bolstering rural economies hit by global trade wars. Amid Trump's disruptions, which have raised food import costs in the U.S. by 10%, this pact creates a stable alternative network, where food security becomes a weapon of resilience. Technology and services form the invisible empire of this alliance, as the agreement opens doors for EU firms in India's digital economy, valued at over $1 trillion by 2025. With provisions for data flows and tech investments, companies like Siemens and SAP can expand operations, creating 500,000 high-skilled jobs in India over the next decade. In return, Indian IT giants like Infosys deepen their EU footprint, evading U.S. visa restrictions exacerbated by tariff tensions. This digital bridge isn't flashy. It's the quiet infrastructure of future dominance. Energy transitions gain momentum through this deal, with reduced tariffs on green tech like solar panels and wind turbines flowing from Europe to India. India's ambitious 500-gigawatt renewable target by 2030 gets a boost, potentially cutting import costs by 15%. For the EU, this means exporting sustainability expertise, aligning with its Green Deal while countering Trump's fossil fuel favoritism that has slowed global clean energy shifts. In this arena, power isn't just electrical, it's geopolitical, forging alliances that outlast temporary trade barriers. Investment flows will surge as the pact includes robust protections for foreign direct investment, encouraging EU capital into India's infrastructure boom. Projections show FDI from Europe doubling to €50 billion annually by 2030. This influx funds highways, ports, and smart cities, while Indian investments in EU startups rise, particularly in biotech and AI. Against Trump's inward turn, which has deterred 20% of global FDI to the U.S., this deal redirects capital to more open shores. Supply chain resilience becomes the unspoken doctrine as businesses diversify away from U.S.-China dependencies amid tariffs that have increased costs by an average of 19% on affected goods. The EU-India corridor offers a middle path with lower risks and costs for electronics and machinery. Companies like Apple and Tesla, already shifting production to India, will accelerate this move, creating a network that Trump's policies inadvertently strengthen for others. Job creation looms large in the near future, with the deal poised to generate millions of positions across both regions. In India, labor-intensive sectors like gems and jewelry could see 1 million new jobs by 2028. Europe benefits from export-driven growth, supporting 600,000 jobs in manufacturing and services. Yet, this isn't egalitarian. Winners emerge from those who adapt, while laggards face the cold reality of displacement in a world reordered by trade pacts. Consumer prices in India may dip as imported goods become cheaper, from European machinery reducing farming costs to luxury items entering at lower duties. This could ease inflation pressures, countering the 5% rise in global commodity prices spurred by Trump's tariffs. In the EU, affordable Indian textiles and spices stabilize household budgets, a subtle buffer against domestic economic strains. Control over consumption patterns shifts, empowering the masses with choices once reserved for the elite. Geopolitical leverage intensifies, as this FTA positions the EU and India as counterweights to US and Chinese dominance. With Trump threatening tariffs on allies like South Korea up to 25%, other nations watch and follow suit. India gains bargaining power in talks with the UK and Australia, while the EU solidifies its role as a trade architect. In this Machiavellian dance, alliances aren't born of friendship but of necessity, ensuring survival in a multipolar order. Environmental standards embedded in the deal enforce sustainable practices, mandating reductions in carbon footprints for traded goods. This could cut emissions from bilateral trade by 10% by 2030. aligning with global climate goals. Trump's rollback of green policies, which has increased U.S. emissions by 3% annually, contrasts sharply, highlighting the pact's role in steering the world toward eco-control. Here, ecology becomes a tool of influence, not idealism. Innovation ecosystems flourish under protected IP regimes, fostering collaborations in AI and biotech that could yield breakthroughs worth trillions. EU-India joint R&D investments are expected to triple to €10 billion by 2028. Amid Trump's tech restrictions, which have halved U.S. exports in semiconductors to certain markets, this pact opens alternative pathways. Knowledge, the ultimate currency, flows freely yet selectively, consolidating power in allied hands. Small and medium enterprises stand to gain disproportionately, with simplified customs and reduced barriers enabling 100,000 Indian SMEs to export to the EU for the first time. In Europe, similar firms access India's digital marketplace, boosting revenues by 15% on average. This democratizes trade, but only for those nimble enough to seize it, leaving the unprepared in the dust of progress. Financial markets react with measured optimism, as stock indices in Mumbai and Frankfurt rise 5% post-announcement, reflecting anticipated growth. Currency stability improves, with the rupee strengthening against the dollar amid reduced U.S. trade deficits from tariffs. Investors, ever the puppeteers, redirect funds, amplifying the deal's ripple effects into wealth creation. Cultural exchanges deepen subtly, as trade paves the way for shared media, education, and tourism, blending European precision with Indian ingenuity. This soft power cements the alliance, making it resilient to political whims like Trump's unpredictable decrees. In the long game, influence accrues not through force, but through the inexorable pull of economic ties. As we approach the horizon, the true impact crystallizes. This FTA isn't just a deal. It's a declaration of independence from unilateral dominance. In the near future, growth rates in India could accelerate by 1% annually, while the EU shores up its 2% GDP expansion. Trump's tariffs, while fortifying America short-term, accelerate the world's pivot, birthing a multipolar economy where adaptability reigns supreme. Reflect now on this narrative of calculated moves and inevitable shifts. The world doesn't bend to idealists, but to those who wield trade as a scalpel. Armed with this knowledge, you hold the key to not just understanding, but mastering the currents that shape fortunes. The shadows of history loom over this pact, reminding us that today's alliances are forged from yesterday's fractures. Negotiations between the EU and India began in 2007, stalled by disputes over intellectual property and market access. But Trump's tariffs acted as the catalyst, accelerating talks in the final 6 months to a swift conclusion. This isn't mere coincidence, it's a deliberate pivot, echoing how past trade wars, like the US-China tensions of the 2010s, birthed alternatives like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Delve deeper into the machinery of this agreement, where rules of origin dictate the flow of benefits with ironclad precision. Goods must meet stringent criteria, often 40 to 60% local value addition, to qualify for tariff cuts, ensuring that third-party nations like China don't exploit the corridor. This safeguard maintains control, preventing the dilution of gains and channeling economic power back to the signatories. Chemicals and plastics sectors stand poised for transformation as the deal slashes duties on EU exports like polymers and fertilizers, vital for India's agriculture and manufacturing. With current bilateral trade in chemicals at €15 billion, projections indicate a 25% increase in the first 3 years, saving Indian importers €500 million annually. Europe, in turn, imports more Indian dyes and intermediates, fortifying supply chains against Trump's 15% tariffs on similar goods from other sources. Electronics and semiconductors reveal a strategic undercurrent, with reduced barriers enabling EU firms like ASML to supply advanced lithography equipment to India's burgeoning chip industry. India's semiconductor market, targeted to reach $100 billion by 2030, will benefit from tariff reductions of up to 10%, accelerating domestic production amid global shortages. This move counters Trump's restrictions on tech exports, which have already halved U.S. shipments to certain markets, redirecting innovation flows to safer alliances. Renewable energy components flow more freely now, with tariffs on EU solar inverters and batteries dropping to zero over 7 years. India's push for 500 gigawatts of non-fossil capacity by 2030 gains momentum, potentially adding 100 gigawatts through enhanced imports valued at 20 billion euros. For young entrepreneurs chasing sustainable startups, this opens doors to joint ventures in green tech, where EU expertise meets Indian scale, birthing unicorns in a post-tariff world. Aviation and aerospace sectors ascend quietly, as the pact eases trade in aircraft parts and maintenance services, crucial for India's expanding fleet. With Air India's order of 470 planes in 2023 still rippling, tariff cuts could reduce costs by 15%, boosting EU exports like Airbus components by 2 billion euros yearly. Amid Trump's threats to aviation allies, this alliance secures skies, ensuring uninterrupted growth in a turbulent global arena. Financial services weave an invisible web of influence, with the agreement liberalizing cross-border banking and insurance, allowing EU giants like Allianz to deepen penetration in India's 1.4 billion-strong market. Projections show a 30% rise in EU financial investments, reaching 15 billion euros by 2028, while Indian fintechs expand into Europe. In an age where Gen Z trades crypto trends, this facilitates seamless digital finance, hedging against U.S. regulatory volatility. Telecommunications equipment benefits from phased tariff reductions, enabling EU providers like Ericsson to equip India's 5G rollout, valued at over $50 billion in infrastructure spend. This could accelerate network deployment by 20%, creating 300,000 jobs in tech hubs like Bangalore. Trump's tariffs on Chinese telecom gear, up to 25%, inadvertently push reliance toward this new axis, solidifying digital sovereignty. Gems and jewelry. India's sparkling export powerhouse shine brighter with easier EU access, where tariffs on processed diamonds fall to negligible levels. Exports, already at 10 billion euros, are set to grow by 40%, supporting artisanal communities in Surat. Europe gains affordable luxury inputs, maintaining its haute couture edge while diverting from sanctioned sources. Leather goods and footwear step forward, as Indian tanneries benefit from reduced EU duties, potentially doubling exports to 5 billion euros by 2030. This aids rural economies, where millions depend on the sector, countering job losses from Trump's 50% tariffs on Indian apparel. The exchange fosters sustainable practices, aligning with millennial demands for ethical sourcing. Marine products sail smoother waters, with tariffs on Indian shrimp and fish dropping in the EU market, boosting exports by 1 billion euros annually. Europe's seafood industry secures diverse supplies, stabilizing prices amid global disruptions. This aquatic alliance underscores resource control in an era of climate-induced scarcities. Engineering goods, the backbone of trade. Sea tariffs plummet on items like pumps and valves, enhancing EU access to India's cost-effective manufacturing. Bilateral flows could surge by 35%, adding 10 billion euros in value. Against Trump's inward policies, this engineers resilience, redirecting global production lines. Intellectual property rights fortify the pact's core, with stronger enforcement on patents and trademarks, protecting EU innovations in India's vast market. This could prevent losses of €2 billion annually from counterfeits, while allowing Indian generics fair play. Knowledge becomes a guarded asset, wielded to maintain technological superiority. Labor standards embedded in the agreement demand adherence to ILO conventions, subtly elevating working conditions in both regions. This could uplift 5 million workers in India's export sectors, aligning with global scrutiny on supply chains. It's not altruism, it's calculated, ensuring the pact withstands ethical challenges from activists and rivals. Dispute resolution mechanisms operate in the shadows, with arbitration panels ready to enforce compliance swiftly. Drawing from WTO models, this system minimizes disruptions, unlike the stalled appeals under U.S. influence. Control remains paramount, averting escalations that could unravel the delicate balance. Hypothetical scenarios unfold in the mind's eye. If Trump escalates tariffs to 60% on allies, this FTA could inspire a cascade of similar deals, isolating the U.S. further. India might leverage it to negotiate with ASEAN, expanding influence in Asia. The EU, meanwhile, strengthens ties with Africa, creating a web of interdependence. Consider the ripple to stock markets. Post-deal, the Sensex climbed 3%, reflecting investor confidence in diversified trade. European indices like the DAX followed suit, up 2.5%, as firms anticipate revenue boosts. For young investors in crypto and stocks, this signals opportunities in trade-linked ETFs. Currency dynamics shift subtly, with the euro and rupee stabilizing against the dollar's volatility from tariff revenues projected at $200 billion in 2026. This stability aids remittances and investments, flowing billions back to economies. Global responses vary. China watches warily, potentially accelerating its own FTAs to counter exclusion. The UK, post-Brexit, hastens its India deal, seeking to reclaim lost ground. Africa and Latin America eye similar pacts, as Trump's policies push multipolarity. This deal sets a precedent, redrawing trade maps. In education, collaborations burgeon, with EU universities partnering Indian institutions, exchanging 100,000 students annually by 2030. Knowledge transfer builds human capital, essential for innovation economies. Healthcare synergies emerge, beyond pharma, in medical devices where tariffs fall, enabling affordable EU tech in Indian hospitals. This could save lives and costs amid global health threats. Tourism rebounds strategically, with eased visa norms boosting flows, adding €5 billion to economies. Cultural soft power amplifies the pact's reach. As chains realign, carbon border adjustments in the deal penalize high-emission goods, pushing green manufacturing. This aligns with youth trends in sustainability. The high trow builds. This FTA redefines power, not through might, but mutual necessity. Impacts cascade, from jobs to geopolitics. Ponder the future. In a world of barriers, those who build bridges command the game. With this insight, navigate wisely, turning global shifts into personal empires. The digital realm expands its dominion through this pact, where data localization norms soften, allowing seamless cross-border flows that empower EU cloud providers in India's trillion-dollar digital economy. Projections indicate a 40% surge in EU digital service exports, reaching €35 billion by 2030, as firms like SAP integrate deeper into Indian enterprises. This isn't innovation for its own sake. It's a calculated grasp on information, the lifeblood of modern control, shielding both from U.S. data privacy whims. Biotechnology alliances germinate in fertile ground, with tariff reductions on lab equipment and seeds fostering joint R&D in crop sciences. India's biotech market, valued at $80 billion in 2025, stands to gain from EU expertise, potentially yielding hybrid varieties that boost yields by 15%. Amid Trump's agricultural tariffs hiking U.S. export costs by 20%, this partnership secures food chains, turning biology into a bastion against scarcity. Infrastructure bonds tighten as the deal encourages EU funding for India's $1.5 trillion national infrastructure pipeline through 2025. Investments in ports and railways could triple to €30 billion annually, accelerating connectivity that bypasses disrupted global routes. For the astute observer, this is groundwork for empire, physical arteries that pulse with commerce, impervious to external sieges. Renewable hydrogen emerges as a silent contender, with provisions for trade in green fuels aligning EU's hydrogen strategy with India's national hydrogen mission. Exports of electrolyzers from Europe could reach €5 billion by 2028, supporting India's 5 million-ton production target. In Trump's fossil-fueled landscape, where tariffs favor coal, this green axis wields energy as a weapon of foresight. Automotive electrification accelerates, with duty cuts on EV components enabling Indian assembly of European models, potentially capturing 10% of India's 30 million vehicle market by 2030. This could save Indian buyers 25% on premium EVs, while EU firms like BMW export €2 billion more yearly. The shift isn't environmental zeal, it's market capture, electrifying profits in a petrol-dependent world. Textile sustainability weaves into the fabric, mandating eco-friendly dyes and fibers that align with EU's Green Deal, boosting Indian exports by 20% to €15 billion. This counters Trump's 25% tariffs on apparel, redirecting supply from US to Europe. Control over standards becomes the thread that binds, ensuring compliance yields dominance. Pharma generics flow unchecked, with IP flexibilities allowing India to export €3 billion more in affordable drugs to Europe annually. Europe's healthcare systems save €1 billion on procurement, diversifying from Chinese APIs amid tariff hikes of 15%. Health, in this calculus, is leverage. Access to life extended through strategic trade. Agri-tech innovations sprout as EU precision farming tools enter India tariff-free, enhancing productivity in a sector employing 45% of the workforce. Yields could rise 10%, adding €500 million to exports of high-value crops like basmati rice. Trump's food tariffs, inflating U.S. imports by 12%, make this pact a harvest of resilience. Services trade, the invisible giant, swells with liberalized access for professionals, projecting a 50% increase in Indian IT exports to the EU, from €37 billion in 2024. EU architectural and engineering services penetrate India, creating synergies worth €10 billion. In the ether of expertise, power accumulates quietly, beyond the grasp of physical barriers. Aerospace collaborations soar, with tariff eliminations on satellite components aiding India's space ambitions, valued at $13 billion in 2025. Joint projects could generate €1 billion in contracts for EU firms like Thales. Above the fray of earthly tariffs, orbital control beckons. Financial tech fintechs converge as the deal eases regulations for digital payments, allowing EU platforms like Revolut to tap India's 1 billion UPI users. Transactions could surge 30% cross-border, adding €5 billion in value. Money's flow, directed thus, becomes the current of influence. Maritime logistics streamline, with investments in shipbuilding and ports under the pact, reducing freight costs by 15% on bilateral routes. This counters Trump's shipping tariffs, which have raised global logistics expenses by 8%. Seas of commerce, navigated wisely, yield uncharted wealth. Cultural industries blend, as tariff reductions on films and books foster co-productions, potentially doubling EU media exports to India to €2 billion. Bollywood's reach in Europe expands, soft power-weaving narratives of alliance. Stories shape minds, a subtle dominion over perception. Environmental credits trade emerges, with mechanisms for carbon offsets linking EU's ETS to India's nascent system, valued at €1 billion in exchanges by 2028. This mitigates tariff-induced emissions rises of 5% globally. Planet's fate, commodified, serves the prudent. Hypotheticals sharpen the edge. Should Trump impose 60% universal tariffs, EU-India GDP growth could outpace US by 1.5%, drawing FDI away. Alliances cascade, with ASEAN eyeing similar pacts. Foresight turns peril into predominance. Global indices reflect the undercurrents, with MSCI India up 4% post-deal, signaling investor pivots from tariff-hit markets. Euro Stoxx 50 mirrors the gain, as diversified portfolios thrive. Markets, the oracle of power, prophecy shifts. China's response looms, accelerating its Belt and Road recalibrations to encircle this new bloc. Trade diversion could cost China $50 billion in exports annually. Rivals stir, but the prepared prevail. U.S. allies waver, with Canada and Mexico exploring EU-India ties to hedge against Trump's volatility. Multilateralism fragments into strategic clusters. Isolation breeds opportunity for the aligned. Youth trends intersect, as Gen Z's crypto and sustainability pursuits find outlets in the pact's green finance provisions, fostering startups valued at $10 billion. Digital natives inherit a rewired world. Future generations, molded by trade, command tomorrow. The climax unveils. This FTA, amid Trump's $175 billion tariff windfall, reorients the global order toward multipolarity. Impacts endure, from doubled trade to resilient chains. Power, redistributed, favors the architects. Contemplate the ledger. In barriers' shadow, bridges forge legacies. With this wisdom, wield the unseen forces, crafting empires from economic tides. Comparative lenses sharpen the view. This EU-India pact stands apart from RCEP, which India exited, or CPTPP, by prioritizing deep services liberalization and sustainability chapters absent in many Asian blocs. While RCEP covers 30% of global GDP, this alliance unites 25% directly, with stronger enforcement on data flows and green standards, making it more resilient to fragmentation. Long-term projections paint a commanding picture. Economists forecast the FTA could lift India's GDP growth by an additional 0.8 to 1.2% annually through 2035, adding roughly $300 billion in cumulative output. For the EU, the boost measures 0.3 to 0.5% higher growth, translating to €150 billion in extra value by decade's end. These are not soft gains. They compound quietly, reshaping fiscal strength. Machinery and capital goods surge ahead. Tariffs on EU industrial equipment, often above 20% today, fall sharply, enabling Indian factories to modernize at lower cost. Projections show a 40% jump in this category, worth €12 billion extra in bilateral flows within 5 years. Control over production efficiency tilts decisively. Steel and metals forge new dominance. India gains near-zero duty access to the EU's €263 billion market for certain grades, potentially expanding exports by 35%. In exchange, European specialty alloys enter India with reduced barriers, stabilizing prices amid global oversupply pressures from tariff wars. Petroleum products navigate calmer channels. Refined fuels and petrochemicals benefit from phased cuts, allowing Indian refiners to export competitively while EU chemical giants secure feedstocks. This sector alone could add €4 billion annually, hedging against volatile energy markets. For the young wealth seeker tracking crypto cycles and startup trends, this opens direct paths. Indian IT talent gains easier mobility into Europe, while EU venture capital flows into Bengaluru fintechs. Imagine allocating into trade-exposed ETFs or green bonds tied to this corridor. Early movers could capture 15 to 25% compounded returns as supply chains reroute. Investment diversification becomes strategic imperative. With U.S. tariffs projected to raise $175 billion in 2026 revenue, yet inflate consumer prices, redirecting portfolios toward Euro-Indian assets offers insulation. Private equity targeting joint ventures in renewables or defense could see deal volumes double to €25 billion by 2030. Risks emerge in the shadows of adjustment. Indian auto assemblers face stiffer competition from European imports, potentially pressuring margins by 8 to 12% initially in the premium segment. Mitigation lies in rapid localization. Those who adapt fast secure market share. IP enforcement tests the alliance. Stronger patent protections favor EU pharma majors, yet India's compulsory licensing safeguards remain intact for essential drugs. This balance prevents outright confrontation, channeling disputes into arbitration. Labor displacement demands vigilance. While 1.5 to 2 million net jobs may emerge across both sides, transitional losses could hit 200,000 in vulnerable EU manufacturing niches. Retraining programs, embedded in the pact, become the quiet armor against unrest. Emerging markets watch and emulate. African nations accelerate FTA talks with both blocs, while Latin America eyes similar diversification from China-US tensions. This deal catalyzes a web of secondary pacts, multiplying its reach. China recalibrates under pressure. Trade diversion estimates suggest Beijing could lose $40 to $60 billion in annual exports as buyers shift to the EU-India route. Beijing's response, deeper RCEP integration, only accelerates the multipolar drift. The United States confronts unintended isolation. Allies like Japan and South Korea quietly explore parallel access to this market, eroding the leverage of unilateral tariffs. Power, once concentrated, diffuses toward cooperative nodes. The crescendo arrives clear and cold. This FTA is no mere treaty. It is a masterstroke of realignment, turning Trump's tariff siege into the forge of a rival economic pole that grows stronger year by year. Armed with these currents, you see the board differently. Barriers rise for some, yet corridors open for those who position wisely. The game rewards precision over passion, foresight over reaction. What legacy will you build in this reshaped world? The pieces are moving. Your move.